What's going on out there, folks? This is Dustin Sherman here with another episode of Forgotten Freedoms. And today I actually have some really, really good guests and a co host. Scott Stansberry is going to be my new co host for the show. But today we have two guests I couldn't wait to get on the show today. One is Rachel Ries.
Hello.
The second one is Sarah Price. And Sarah has been one of those people I've seen at the school board quite a bit, testifying and kicking butt up there. So we got them both here today, and we're going to talk a little bit about the school board and some of the things that we see that needs to be done to make this city a little bit better city. So welcome, ladies. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. So Rachel, for those that don't know, is running for school board. Hopefully everybody out there knows.
Hopefully.
Hopefully they've all cast their vote. I know I have. I know Scott has. Been pushing to get her in there because the policies and everything that our school board have right now, nothing but detrimental to the city. So, Rachel, tell us a little bit about your platform and why you decided to run for school board.
So I'm basically running on parental rights, school choice, and I want to get all this CRT equity business out of our schools and get back to traditional learning and academics, which is kind of how I ran across Sarah. I started going to school board meetings, and I heard her testify a couple times. I know you and I have talked about that. And I went to a forum where I heard her talk about what's going on in ASD, and it kind of resonated with my experience. It wasn't something that came on overnight. It was really kind of a process over a couple of years of my personal experiences and then talking to other parents with children, people in my neighborhood, people at my work. So it was different schools. It wasn't just one teacher, one school. And I started hearing the same stories, and I realized that unfortunately I wasn't special. And it was everywhere, just this constant pushing parents out, pushing good teachers out, and not doing what was right for the kids. My son, who's sitting over here in the little audience today, he said something to me in the car that kind of caught my attention. He told me, "You're the first adult that's said you think kids are people." And I was like, I do think kids are people, and I think what we do affects them, and they are the future of our city. And that really kind of got to the heart of why I'm running. I think the school board has forgotten that these kids are people, and they don't belong to them. They belong to their parents.
Well, and if you've gone to the school board enough in the last 2 years, really, it's been longer than that, but the last 2 years, you can really see how the school board members really want to control the kids. And they don't want the parents involved. Because if the parents get involved, then they are more likely to be held accountable. Mm-hmm. So, Sarah, real quick, I've seen you down at the school board. I thought you've done an excellent job. One of the testimonies I've seen, you were defending keeping ROTC, if I remember, not Needle. And you want to tell us a little bit about that and your thoughts on that?
Well, so the reason why I started speaking to the school board initially, last quarter, everyone. But then throughout the summer, it became very evident that the virus was not affecting children. Said we were not really going to open our schools, and they really didn't have any. So I did some of my own research, saw what we talked about. So I decided about real. And it got to the point I could just science, weren't listening to the teacher union. So many teachers, they wanted to be in person. They want to see these back. That broke. That's not what education. It's never. Until my eyes were really open. And in that case, that was just another situation. Something my high school on ASD's trying to ask them. It wasn't the actual program, it's a summer program. Virtually are well, COVID's over, we're getting back into everything, just move. But I think Rachel Ries agrees, you can't move on from what happened over. And thousands of them. There's over 40,000 kids in this district, and every single one of them suffered. They may not see that now, but at least as someone it runs so much deeper than a lot of people really know.
Are you still in school? You're a senior this year?
I only got a few more weeks to go.
Well, I tell you what, there's definitely some room on the school board for someone like you if we need to be on there. I think that there's, we've had some ups and downs with the school boards. Right now, we've only got one conservative voice on there, and that's Dave
Donnelly.
Dave Donnelly. I spoke to him actually last week, and I can never remember his last name for some reason. But Dave is actually he's a common sense conservative that's on there, and he is so outnumbered, it's ridiculous. It's a lot like our assembly, and we need to even the playing field for sure for the kids. And as somebody that's married to an educator, someone that teaches in the schools, I see the frustration in her even when she comes home from work, because they're very limited as to what they teach. And they don't teach the history, and they don't teach civics, and they don't teach a lot of the stuff that I got taught growing up. Most of it was life skills. We knew how to balance a checkbook, how to do all stuff like that. It really amounted to having your life skills whenever you got out of school. They prepared us before we got out. I don't see so much that that's happening anymore. So, Rachel, what's some of the first things you want to do when you get to the school board? Because I have a feeling you're going to win. So we're going to start, looking to the future, not the past.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you assuming the win. That's good to know. So one of the first things I want to do is we've already started. We're going through all the KFIRS reports, gotten all the policies from all 9 of their articles, and we're cross-referencing those to budget items. Because I don't think that you want to just go in and say, oh, we're going to cut this one thing, and you haven't research on what's going on in schools themselves. I want to get out and talk to students like Sarah. This affects them. Why wouldn't we want to hear their voice? I want to talk to the parents. I think they've been disgruntled for a long time, and we need to hear the unintended consequences of policies and decisions. And I want to hear from the teachers. We're losing a lot of good teachers, and that's a problem. You hear a lot of current talk from the current board about how we're losing teachers, we have retention issues, and I don't think it's just a money problem. I think it's a culture problem. And yeah, we all want to make a decent, good living, but we also want to work at a job where we feel heard and valued and like we are doing something. So I want to get into what that looks like for start addressing those issues. And it's a big laundry list, but you just got to wade in there. You got to look it all right in the face. Don't try to hide it or sugarcoat it or sweep it under the rug and say, okay, what are we really dealing with here? And then just address it.
I know Anchorage is a little bit different animal than the rest of the United States, obviously. And I know that Anchorage has had a real big history of hiring out-of-state teachers. And they come up here on contracts and they stick around for decided Anchorage ain't for them and they leave. I know because my wife's parents had come up here and they taught. They were actually out on Little Diomede Island for a while. She was a kid. And, that's kind of becoming a little bit of a problem. Obviously, we're a little short. We're a lot short.
Yes.
And, they're not homegrown teachers. There are a lot of them are coming from out of state. They're signing, 2-year contracts and they're leaving. And we can't get any kind of consistency if we have teachers. I know that, give you an example, growing up in Colorado, the teachers that I had taught my mom, they taught my dad, grandparents knew them by first name. We did a lot of stuff like that. And what ended up happening is we had consistency. Every year we had the same things taught to all of us. And it worked. And back in the 80s here, we were one of the top school districts or school systems in the
Might have actually been up for a while. Yeah.
and that's obviously slipped. So, Sarah, since you're still in, technically, with a couple weeks left to go, what would you like to see the school district change you like to see new things being in schools? Is there things that you feel like you've missed out on, considering that the learning and stuff that they're offering?
I think really good perspective from my, but for those who don't have, even if kids graduate, what are they doing next? And unfortunately, that's, I think, a big part, because we don't have and you want to talk about education, that's such a big part of school. But if you live in the state of Alaska, and we have this adolescent suicide rate throughout the last several young kids suicidal because of the situation. And there needs to be people at our schools that support kids for that, so they can. You need to take standardized tests that you can get into this college and make goals for yourself. And while I've done that, and I know students that have done that don't have that system after I'm in age.
And I know that that's one thing in Colorado that we were able to teach or be taught, actually. And in the town I grew up in, was a farming community. We had, when we weren't in school, we had things we could do, for the summertime. And a lot of us back then used to drive tractor and stuff for harvest. And before I even graduated high school, I had traveled to Montana, Minnesota, places like that, driving combines. And so my hometown, the industry that led after high school was farming. And, you didn't have to have a college education to drive a tractor. You didn't have to have one to fix a tractor. And it was a pretty good living. The difference is now is, a lot of like in Anchorage and the big cities, there's nothing for these kids to do if they haven't kind of pre-set up their education after school. And I was the kind of kid that I didn't really want to go to school. Ended up enlisting in the military. Thought that was going to be my career. Found out later, 6 weeks into boot camp, that wasn't for me because I had asthma. They found out and kicked me out, but it's happened. So I ended up going back to something I had to do, machines. But if I didn't have the farming stuff, I probably wouldn't have been able to excel at doing what I do with the bowling machines. So, with that said, we there's a lot of things that ASD could be re-adding, cost them that. Mm-hmm. From what I understand, that's no longer there. And, some of the stuff that we're doing right now, audio, video stuff, this would be really easy for someone from school to pick. There's so many opportunities that our schools, I think, are missing. And unfortunately, it's the kids who end up missing out through that whole thing. So let me ask you this, Rachel. Mm-hmm. How has the campaign been? This is something new for you. So
yes,
you're a candidate now. So how is life as a campaign?
It's been a learning experience, a pretty steep one, but not an unpleasant one. It's really gotten me out into the community in a different way than I'm used to being out in the community. And I got to meet a lot of interesting people. Like I met her at a forum. Mm-hmm. I'd seen her and heard her testify, but I was in a forum, Our Schools, Our Voices, mm-hmm. and she put this chat up crisis she was experiencing in Eagle River High School. And I remember just texting her. I had to ask the moderator to question me again. I was like, I'm sorry, that chat was really, I was invested in reading that and I didn't hear what you asked me. So, but it was worth it, right? And I don't think a practice would have. No.
Because some of the ones in that. Mm-hmm. And honestly,
and I totally sent her a private message. I think the moderators got it. And I was like, this is my cell phone. I want to hear what you have to say. And it's created a really interesting relationship that I would like to keep, even though she's going to go to college and do great things. But there's a couple things she said that I want to touch on too, just the campaign. But it has been good. We've gotten a lot of positive response, and I think that gives me hope. And I think it's hopeful for our community because these kids their parents do want better. The teachers that are keeping, they do want better. And I think there's a sleeping army of us out there. And if we can get together and show up to the polls and vote our voice, then we can do real change. But
Right.
a couple of things Sarah said. She said she had parents that really invested in her. So it's when I was a kid, I remember my school really getting on my mom about, you got to come to the school. My mom worked 2 jobs. She was washing windows and selling Tupperware and everything else. And then when I was a parent with my 2 oldest that are growing out, they were always saying, you need to come down to the school more. We want more of you. And it was hard because I was in the military. But here, so that was my experience. And I come to ASD with my youngest, and I'm like, hey, I want to be here. I'm retired now. I'm here. And they were like, why? We don't want you. So it's already hard enough to get the parents that want to be there and they can't, or maybe they don't know how to be there. And so you have parents that do want to be there. Thanks, but no thanks. So it really disadvantages the whole system because, my mom may not have been there all the time, but she was invested that I'd be in school. But my friend's mom was. And she would always be like, you come sit with us and let me show you how to do it. And it's a community. And Anchorage is a bigger town, but it's still small enough. I know all my neighbors. I know whose kids belong to houses. And I don't think that's an unreasonable thing to expect. And then you were talking about college. I don't think King Tech is enough. I think we need more industries that are in Anchorage. We don't have a competitive school to work pipeline. And we have such a lack of education for the average student. They're not competitive once they are. People don't want to hire them. They can't count change. They can't read an analog clock. I mean, things we take for granted. And I think it's a travesty, to be quite fair.
I'm glad that you touched on the not being able to count change kind of thing because, as an employer here in town, and I hire a lot of people a year. With COVID, I had to hire about 3 times more people than I would normally have to hire. Because if somebody got sick, there was a thing where they had to take a week off of work. We always had to have someone to cover. The struggles I had with that was finding someone that was competent with money, also someone that was competent wanting to work, not just paycheck. And then they threw the curveball at us about unemployment was X amount of time, and people didn't want to come in and work for money. Whenever they were given it for free by the government. So trying to get people to understand that the government is not going to last forever and, get them back into the idea of going to work again was tough. So, there's a lot of things out there that I see school boards doing that need to refrain from doing. One of them got started during the COVID crisis, and that was the Zoom stuff. Right?
Yes.
And there was a lot of educators and teachers, and this was just not in Anchorage, it was nationally, where you didn't want the parents watching. There was a lot of educators that were like, well, you can't be on the Zoom with your kid. Well, I don't know about you, but if I had a school-age kid and they were in school, I want to know what they were learning, and that would be my opportunity right there.
I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you were a student for this, but I had at the time a 10-year-old, and like she touched on, when the pandemic first happened, yeah, that's my child. There's nothing more important to me. So when they said, we're going to shut the schools down because we don't know what's going on, the president was saying, we're going to expect a bad 2 weeks. And all this, I was like, yeah, let's do that. That's a good choice. But then we did. We had all summer to figure that out. And I think COVID had a silver lining, and it was the exposure it gave education. Because we did get to see, and it was no longer, your teacher didn't say that. You got that on YouTube. It was, oh my God, your teacher did say that. Yeah. And it was realizing what he wasn't being taught. I kind of felt a little gaslit, honestly, when I talked to the schools, because I said, you're teaching my kid for 20 minutes in the morning, and then you're expecting him to work on his own on 4 different websites. Then he checks in again in the afternoon for 20 minutes, and you give him his homework. I was an essential worker and a single parent. I had to go to work. Boss was like, you can't stay home with your kid or you get another job. Right. Like, oh, this is bad.
One of the other things that came about with COVID was that when parents decided to go to the school board, they've had enough.
Yeah.
We got labeled as domestic terrorists.
Oh, and fascists
Yep.
I think
and
that probably
racists.
grouped in.
I actually got confronted in the parking lot at a school board meeting and called a racist because I had heard some people testify that the children should not just be masked, but parents shouldn't be allowed in the schools. Desks should be 6 feet apart, and they should have their temperature taken, and no lunch, and no
Right.
recess. And I said, it really galls me that you're meeting with kids right now. They're not masked in the district building, and you're saying my kid has to be masked all the time.
We
Yeah.
need a huge for academic. There's nothing in students to be driven. There's nothing saying this should be your driving for trying to get the eye test into college. So there isn't that good culture of supporting students and supporting teachers, and it's not just
Yeah.
so many teachers I know. They're not the teachers for teachers that have been in the district for 20 years now at the same school, and they're done. They're done with what is done with how they're done with the students acting well and leaving because of that environment. And with my testimonies to the school, talk about being labeled certain ways. There was people, the community in my own school district that were bad talking minor at the moment. I was 16 years old, about how I wanted. And these were my teachers that were specifically targeting me and talking about me and other students when they went and assembly. I don't want to. They had teachers that were attacking them in schools, bad mouthing. Have students have that experience and to have it tolerated, I was in disbelief.
Well, that's the big problem in schools right now is everything's become too political, right? And we see that in every aspect of our lives now. And as much as anybody may like Trump or the whole thing when he ran for president, that kind of lit the fire under a lot of conservatives, and we kind of all said, and I think that the school board panicked. I think boards, this is nationally as well as locally. I think that all the politicians, whether they're school board or whether they were local assembly or whatever legislative branch that they worked in, they got on this kick and they got kind of a high for doing the things that they were doing. They have not figured out how to back off.
Yeah. Well, in all fairness, I mean, we were asleep at the wheel for a long time.
For a long time.
And anymore, you have to say there's no fence sitting. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And we've all got to just wrap our minds around that. And I mean, we were asleep. We were. And we just let it happen. I let it happen. You let it happen. We all did. And we've got to own that and say, okay, not anymore. Get out and vote. And that's really how you get your voice heard, especially here. You're 1 or 2 degrees away from your officials.
Well, one of the things that, and you'd kind of mentioned it, there was nothing to challenge the kids. And I've been thinking about this since you said that, Sarah. And that was, when I was growing up, we used to have a program called Strive. We had a couple different ones, but Strive was the one that and it was basically for gifted kids. And it may not be, Strive had different levels. Like you might be gifted at math or you might be gifted at English. There was different types of things that you could participate in. And our school was about sophomore, so I was in it from the 4th grade till I was a sophomore, and then they eliminated it. And whenever they did that, a lot of kids lost their drive because now they had nothing to shoot for. And I've talked to a couple different school board members here locally. One of them, Dave, and the other one is a new member, and that was I talked to him at length at the assembly one day and asked them why they don't have programs that really concentrate on those that are striving to do better. And he couldn't give me an answer. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, why don't we put those programs back in and see if the graduation rates and the numbers and stuff go up? Well, we're not really concentrating. How is that teaching kids to be better?
Well, sorry, I don't mean to make faces at you. This is shocking.
No, I'm telling you.
We actually, I think we was a time where students that tested certain on these certain tests were able to be part of the class, and that's personally where I got my how to prepare presentation. Have like think about different topics. We learned about marine biology. We learned about forensics. About the jungle. It just made me love learning. No matter what it was, I wanted, and I kept that throughout my entire high school. And the kids that were in that program, I still see being just before.
Of course, they don't want you knowing more than them.
And
we have an educated citizenry.
I'm certain that as they were talking about, our math and English scores, the fact that are 70% trying to twist that and make it look like we're not in serious trouble. And there's school board saying, well, why don't we just lower our standard? And that's not the solution.
That sounds like a Portland, Oregon story right there. And speaking of Portland, they've actually lowered the. I'm trying to remember exactly how this was worded. Article I read a while back, but basically, there's no. They've lowered the credit requirement to where they don't have to have English and math to graduate. They've lowered the requirement. And whenever I graduated, we had to have 24, which by the time you end up graduating high school, I think you end up with almost 40 if you pass everything. So you can pass high school pretty easy already for the most part. I graduated at 24 because I was in sports and I hated school. There wasn't enough challenge after Strive was gone, and I it wasn't that I wasn't smart enough to graduate. I ended up putting all myself last.
That's something important you said. It's not that you weren't smart enough to graduate. I took the time, my campaign manager and I were in alternative schools and games because we weren't campaigning. Just get that on. We were just interested. Like, what's the real on the ground story? And a lot of those kids come from troubled homes, lower socioeconomic stresses. They're not idiots. Mm-hmm. They're actually really bright. Mm-hmm. And that's a potent problem here in our district. We have kids that are economically challenged. Their parents are struggling to make ends meet. Their kids' homework is not a priority because they're bad. It's because they're busy.
Right.
And the schools are not getting properly resourced because the district's giving them a one-size-fits-all. Every campus will be the same. I really think we decentralize the model and get down to every campus needs to serve their community. If we hired those principals and said, you're the guy that we think can run this, then let's let them run it.
Right.
Give us their budget, give us their footprint. And then, if we can't afford something, we've got to come choices, but that's just being an adult and prioritizing. Yeah, kids are not dumb because they're poor or because they perform poorly. Mm-hmm. They're not properly managed.
Well, and that's the thing too, is if you were to look at all of our artists and stuff across the country, music artists, actual, graphic artists, places, things like that, you'd be amazed at how many people didn't graduate high school. Just found something that they excelled at it. And that's the one thing that I don't see that our school system does anymore is they don't concentrate on what kid is good at. If you find someone that is an all around, like you could say that I'm kind of a handyman or a fix it all. I can fix everything. I can work on buildings. I can do all that kind of stuff. If I would have been, if they could have stressed that to me, I probably would be making, 6 digits a year, easy. But they didn't do that, even though I showed the capability of being able to do stuff. They didn't concentrate on that. They concentrated on things that I wasn't interested in. And, growing up as a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. See, my eyes won't let me do that. So, I decided to enlist in the military, and I was hoping that was going to take me further than what it did. But I had something to fall back on. A lot of kids don't have that nowadays.
No, and I know she's going to a military academy, which good on you, by the way. That's double tough. I never would have accepted. But you talk about the military. So one of the things in the military that I noticed when I was in was I got a lot of these kids escaping the trailer park. They're escaping generational poverty. They're escaping no future. And they're coming in the military. And then I would get them, even as a E6, E7, as a commander, and read, simple problem solving. And so they would get marginalized and they'd get put out as a failed press, or they wouldn't get into MOSs that challenged them. And it was really sad. And it's an ongoing problem, right? These kids, they grow up one day, they become adults, and then they're in our communities. Now they can either be in our communities, homeless people, animals, and drug addicts, and people who know future, so why should they try? Or they can be people that feel like they are doing something they love or something they at least can tolerate, and they can raise their family and they can have that security and those options. See, I hear a lot of the outcome, right? It's not equality. So that one just hits home because I grew up poor and public education was how I got out.
Right. So for everybody that's watching the show, I had mentioned earlier in the show that I had a co-host, and he's been so far silent because I haven't let him speak much. But I'm going to introduce Scott Stansbury and let him kind of key in on a few of the things we talked about. And so, Scott, I'm going to let you give your views on some stuff, and then we'll move on to a few other things. But Scott, welcome aboard, and can't wait to see what this partnership does here in the future.
Well, thank you for having me. First off, it has been a pleasure to listen to you. You, young lady, thank you very much for your willingness to join the Air Force and fight for our freedom. That means personally. A lot of people are not willing to stand up because freedom is free, as we're finding out in this time, the way that it's going. But do you have any big aspirations that if there was something you could tell the teachers to change right now, what would it be?
Not as much. I have teachers, but the problem that I've seen is it's not consistent. So it's not every teacher is held to the same standard. I mean, it's been so cream of the crop. They're the best. So they definitely need to be in charge of their teachers. Because it is possible in ASD, because I had those teachers. And there just needs to be and also caring for students. The best teachers that I've seen are not just only good at teaching students, but they will teach students that and they help them along. So we need more of those teachers who are not just good at connecting with students.
If there was something that we could do as come together to help get the additional aids that they need, what are some of those things that you think that we could do as a community?
I don't think that's their solution. One memorandum, and it's going to solve every problem, but it never does. So what really is going to help is having people on the school board listen, discussion. Discuss things. They do not talk about things. They just want to their opinion, choose, and then they let a superintendent. But there are teachers saying, "This is what I." This is saying, nobody's talking, and that's one of the reasons I think that is Rachel Ries's best quality is the fact that she wants to talk to anyone and everyone. I was out campaigning with her, and I've been at campaigning with a few other. And I am not joking. She would stop at every single door that we had, and she would want to have a genuine conversation with that person. She wanted to connect with them. She wanted to find out what they needed, what they saw work, and she wanted to listen. Nobody else is doing that right. No one is listening. Starting these, and they're just shutting them down. And so we need far more dialogue.
Thanks. And I didn't pay her to say that.
Perfect campaign message right there.
I know. Carson, I need to bring her on board.
Enough from the egghead.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about CRT and what
CRT.
this has been kind of a hot button topic in the last year or so, maybe a little bit longer than that. But let's talk about CRT and how you two feel about it. Rachel, let's go ahead and have you go first. I know that this is something that's a little difficult to talk about, but
not for me.
Okay.
No, I'll talk about it. I'll talk about anything.
Go ahead. Give us your thoughts on CRT and what you would do once you're on the school board to eliminate it.
Yeah, well, first off, I think it's corrosive and it's the new racism of our day. I mean, let's just be plain. And I have a multiracial family. I got multiracial kids. And my youngest wanted his older brother, who's dark, to come to school because he thought his teacher would like him better if she knew he had a darker brother. And I thought, what's that? I started paying attention. And I started hearing things that were coming home. And he told me that racism was when white people don't like black people. I said, well, you're almost there. It's when somebody doesn't like somebody else because of the ethnicity and the color of their skin. Because said, and that was when I noticed, okay, that's the subliminal message, right? He is not a sophisticated thinker at this time. He's a 10-year-old.
Right.
And that's the real danger of CRT is they're taking it to our children who don't have that more sophisticated understanding of these topics to say, wait a minute, I see the fallacy or the trickery in what you said where they do the bait and switch. And so they get indoctrinated. And I actually got called unpatriotic by my opponent for calling it indoctrination, but I think a spade's a spade every day of the week. And CRT is doing more to divide our community. It's corrosive. It's not what Dr. King was talking about, equality. I have a legal background, which is funny when you said you might be a military lawyer. I was a military person for a long time. And equality is where you say, okay, you're all going to have the same starting line and the same set of resources. What you do with it is on you. Equity, that's what you get in a divorce or a business deal. It's an equitable distribution of assets, and it's not what you put in. It's the equalizing of what you get out of it, and it's not always fair. That's why it's usually done by lawyers. So, I mean, but not to be too pat, it's just CRT is getting perverted in our young schools. It did start out as a genuine legal theory in the colleges, and it had its place and time there. And if they want to teach it in colleges and people want to learn about it, that may or may not be appropriate, but you're an adult at that point. Putting it in our schools, there was an interesting article that came out on Substack, said the kids don't grow out of it, and it talked about how they're changing from the rule of law to the rule of man, and law is becoming a subjective thing. And it stems from this CRT, equity, diversity. And it's not to say I don't think that we shouldn't celebrate our diversity of experiences and where we come from. You come from somewhere very different than me. You come from somewhere even more different. And that's fine. We can talk about it openly and make any of us greater or lesser. Doesn't mean that you owe me anything. I owe you anything. It's just, it's the new racism is what it is.
The idea of equity to me basically would mean somebody on the street would get the same things.
And maybe they did or didn't.
And you know, that's kind of how I see it. And you could even go further back than that and look in history. You know, this country was originally formed as a republic, which basically meant you got what you worked for. You didn't have to give anybody else your stuff. If you worked for it, it was yours. And you know, we have a democracy now, which basically they're trying to turn into socialism and everything else. And if it keeps going down the path that it's going, whatever you work for, someone else can come and take it. That is not what this country was founded on. It was founded on it's founded on what you had and what you bought and what you made is yours. You know, it's like the idea of buying a home. If I buy a home, that doesn't mean that you get to live there.
Not unless you want me to.
Yeah, exactly. It's my choice.
Right.
And unfortunately, they're trying to make it to where somebody that may not have worked as hard, put the time in, they want the same things that those who did have. And it's, to me, I think everybody's created equal. The Constitution says that. Right. And it really depends on how much you want to make.
Well, and I think CRT is divisive, and I'd love to see what both of you think about this, but I really don't think we have in America and in Anchorage is a race problem.
No,
I
we
think
don't.
what we have is a class problem. And that goes back to not identifying the gifts in the lower socioeconomic and sparking them to strive and want to do better. But yeah, it's not a race problem unless we make it one. And that's what they're doing, making it a race problem.
And
It's
that's
a class
exactly
problem.
what I was going to say.
Okay.
Because the reason why we care so much about who's on education, because education is the ultimate equalizer. You can
Yes.
come from anywhere. If you get an education, have these opportunities, you can truly. And the problem is that, I really, really saw this over the pandemic when they put us all on virtual, because those kids that did not have good families, that were being abused, truly, disgustingly, kids that did not have the right technology, that didn't have any of the support aspects, they were being discriminated against in their education. They were.
Completely
And-
marginal.
And the students that had parents that had more money, you could into the private school and give your kid a car so they can drive over to the valley where they were still having schools. So those who had money had the opportunities to get education over the last 2 years, and those who didn't, as Steve said, bad. And then they made it a race issue. They designed the problem, and then they gave no solution.
Yeah.
That's very unshocking, honestly. It doesn't surprise me at all. So, you guys are both here in Anchorage and in the Muni. Let me ask you this. So, Mayor Dave Bronson just put in and appointed and finally got confirmed Junior Amave.
Which I think is great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I've been an employer and everything. I've had several Pacific Islanders working for me, and they're great people. I every one of them I value. They work their butt off, and I think that Mr. Bronson putting him in place, not overlooking them, is one of the best things that we could have had. And for somebody like that to be able to come in here, and we have a huge Pacific Islander population in Anchorage, huge. I see them every weekend. They're probably some of my best customers. And in my opinion, I think the assembly overlooked him, putting him in as an equity officer. And I don't know if he applied for it. I don't know if there was anything in there, but I think that decision was huge. And I think that will do nothing but help with some of the race stuff that we keep seeing.
Yeah, for a variety of reasons. I mean, he openly talks about his faith, which I think is amazing. You don't see enough of that. Because at the end of the day, we are a founded country on Judeo-Christian ethics. And while I don't think that we need to be religious everywhere we go, we do need to recognize that's an important history as a nation,
Right.
and not denigrate people who are open about it. It's one of Junior's real powers.
Well, and I think he's not going to make it a political
No,
toy.
he's
you know
just
what
being
I mean?
who he is.
And I think the other guy that was in there, and I don't know him, so you can take it for what it's worth, but I think that initially when the assembly decided to create that position, that's what it was meant for. And I think that it was a good thing that Bronson put in there. I think we couldn't have anybody person in there for that. With that said, with CRT and all the other stuff that the school board's done, we've got two great candidates, you, Rachel, and Mark Anthony Cox is running. Last night was actually the first chance I had to hear him speak. There was an event last night, and it made me even gladder that I gladder. That's not even a word. It made me happier that I voted for both of you two. I had already interviewed you, and I knew where you were sitting. But listening to Mark talk, he's very articulate, very educated. One of the best people we could possibly have beside Rachel. So I'm glad to have you guys on. We've been going for about 30 minutes or so, or a little bit longer than that. Is there anything that you guys would like to add to this interview? If you could say something to other teachers and the other school board members, even if you don't win, some of the advice that you would give.
Well, I think Sarah's point about listening is key. I spent 2.5 years as a commander, and I took a platoon overseas to Afghanistan as a platoon leader. I can tell you, listening is the most important part of leadership. It's not about me dictating from on high. There were times for that when I was like, we're going to execute this mission or this task, but those times are a lot fewer and far between than you think. The real art of leadership, and successful at it, is listening and then answering those needs. My job as a leader, I was always of service to the people that I was given the honor of being in charge of. And I think that the school board right now and a lot of the people in administration have forgotten that they have been given input into the most precious resource, which is our children. And they need to learn to listen and to partner with the parents and the community members, because when they don't, I mean, it's really losing out on the resource. And
How about you, Sarah?
I would just say, I really just would encourage everyone. Reason why out and serving of you want, and so you have to vote, and you can't just vote. You have to get the people you know to vote. You have to get 18-year-olds like everyone.
yeah, to her point, real quick, I mean, we've had what, Carson, 12% of the vote come back in from everything that got mailed out. So, and that's been kind of traditional for all community elections. So we have a city that's being run by a small voice, not by majority voice.
I know that Anchorage traditionally doesn't have a huge turnout unless it's either for a mayor or it's a national thing. And we proved through the last mayor election that the conservatives are sick of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that they're still paying attention, because we definitely need to get everybody out and vote. And last night they passed out a whole bunch of flyers and stuff for people who hadn't turned their ballots in yet. And I spent some of the night last night calling those people to see it. Most of them don't recognize my number, so they don't answer. So lots of voicemails last night trying to get the vote in.
We appreciate the effort. It's important.
It is. And, being in the building last night, and you were there, being in the building last night, you could definitely feel the camaraderie. And, I couldn't imagine, let's put it this way, I couldn't imagine being in the other party, being in a room right now, because they're worried.
And they should be.
And they very well should be. And, I've been around, different platforms and stuff. It kind of reminded me, I got a funny story about the place I used to work. When Trump ran, so I kind of feeling in Anchorage, right? You got different groups out there like Alaska and all these other groups that are coming together and stuff on the other side. I worked in a primarily Democrat area, California, and watching the election when Trump ran. I hate talking about Trump, but whenever he ran, it's really opened my eyes as to just how disillusioned the other side really is. And he wins, right? I'm at work. He wins. I go. My place is normally bar. I got the bowling alley. Everyone's usually in a good mood. They announced that he won. That was the most somber night I have ever seen in my life. At work. What the hell is everyone so upset and just melancholy? Wasn't any energy in the building. Well, I went in the bar and they had all the news covers going on. And I'm like, oh, everyone's depressed. That's what the deal is. And for me to see how that affected so many people, that's kind of how I felt whenever Trump lost on the last election. So I get it, I understand it, but at the same time, we have allowed things to rule our lives.
Whether you liked Trump or hated him, you have to admit one thing. This country, and he woke people up.
He did.
Because a lot of people really thought that he didn't even get endorsed by the Republicans, actually. So he kind of came from behind and showed them that, yes, there is a bunch of people out here and this does matter. So get up, show up.
The one thing I would like to say, and this is to all the young people out there, Joe Biden is proof that anybody can win the presidency. I'm telling you that right now. So if you have aspirations to be a president, just look on your TV right now and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh
Hopefully we
God.
can start electing leaders that use their brain and they're not being fed.
I almost feel bad.
It took me 40.
I love it. Say that again. Give her 40 years. Future presidents.
All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show. Ladies, I appreciate you guys
Thank
stopping
you.
by.
Thank you so
Scott,
much.
thank you for doing the audio and video today. It's been a pleasure. Is there anything you would like to add, actually?
No, it was amazing to sit and listen to two very amazing ladies.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I agree. All right, folks. Well, we're going to go ahead and sign off. And this is Dustin Sherman and Scott Stansberry, along with Rachel Ries and Sarah Price. Thank you for tuning in, and we will catch you guys another time.